Hi. So my project was about Tlingit Art, which in my opinion is really cool, and that inspired me to, make this whole project. I've seen, totem poles, of course, classic longhouses and stuff, but it's just kind of the art which was the most interesting thing to me. So as early humans, crossed the land bridge from Russia to Alaska, they moved down the west coast of America, but not all of them did. As with the Tlingit, so they settled the northwest region of America and the southern kind of panhandle of Alaska here. So the really interesting thing is that it's actually a temperate rainforest biome, which you really wouldn't expect. But as I'll elaborate on later, that allowed their art to develop into what it is because the total abundance of wood made it really easy to make a lot of houses, but have the excess material to make art with it. So once the Tlingit people settled, they kind of divided into two moieties, which are kind of, groups, not clans, because clans fall under the moieties, but these are the Raven and the Eagle moieties. They're led by different chiefs, and each moiety had their own leader, and then clans fall under the moieties. So, you have the moieties on top, then the clans, and then the families. That's kind of how it is there. The really interesting thing is that the Tlingit never had like a singular leader. So this idea of moieties and these two big groups that get divided has been around since the Tlingit people have. There's never been like a single unified leader. So that's pretty interesting to me. And of course, as affected all Native Americans, colonization really affected them like very negatively. And under this topic specifically, once they started developing like assimilation missionary schools and stuff, they totally cut off Tlingit like culture stuff, like art, just customs like dancing and singing, and the ceremonies that I'll elaborate on later. But this almost just killed Tlingit art like completely. Again, as I'll say later, some styles of weaving they had almost totally died and only really popped up the last, decades, like 40, 50 years, which is kind of insane. And expanding on this, potlatches were also banned. And this eventually, almost killed out totem poles as well because there was no ceremonies to put the totem poles up. So it was art, dancing, singing, just, everyday customs that almost got completely killed by colonization. Now to dive more into the art itself. And I want to get into resources and methods that Tlingit art was made with first. So the basic fundamental part of a lot of Northwestern Native American art, specifically Tlingit right now, but is called form line. So you'll see this in a lot of the pictures I have, but it's these specific shapes that are just thick lines. Sometimes they thin and swell, but you'll see them repeating a lot, but they can use them to make a bunch of different subjects, whether it be a face, raven, or a fish, or anything. Form line art is really the foundation of like everything that Tlingit art is. And now the resources, expanding on what I was talking about earlier. So really they were able to make this much art and out of this much wood because just, it's a temperate rainforest. So there's a lot of vegetation, more specifically a lot of wood. And the wood they had was called red cedar, and this was a soft wood, so it allowed them, to mold it, ply it, carve it easier. So that really was the basis of, the totem poles and a lot of the carved almost plates you'll see. They just had a lot of decorative items too. They made boxes to store stuff, but again, that had art on it. So really the ease and just availability of this soft red cedar wood really allowed them to do as much wooden art as they did. So now for the tools that they used with the wood, the first one I want to talk about is called the adze. So if your basic axe, you got the handle right here, and then the axe kind of comes out like this. An adze is like that, but it comes out like that way. So that's used to shape the wood. They use that not just for art, but for building, their long houses they had. as a common tool, but they also use it with art. So another tool was just they used knives. I mean, that's kind of obvious, but they used curved knives, which they also called hook knives. And this is, they use these along with just straight knives, but it's to carve out details once you've got the wood ready to carve. So now I'm going to dive into weaving a little bit. This is a huge part of Tlingit art. It's probably one of the biggest things that I have learned about and that I've been able to like dive into. So a lot of Tlingit weaving was done with spruce root. And this spruce root is really long and really thin, and it isn't needed for the tree to survive. So you can harvest it, the tree still stays alive. And of course there's a lot of it because there's a bunch of trees and there's a bunch of roots they produce. And because of how small it is, once it was weaved, it created a really tight surface that could hold things, and it would hold its own structure. They also wove grass into these spruce root designs, and the grass would darken over time, but the spruce root would keep its color. So a lot of Tlingit weavers wouldn't really see the designs right away. It would take some time before they were able to form. So now to dive into, the more modern, common type of weaving, which is called chilkat. So this weaving used mountain goat wool, and this is the most common type of Tlingit weaving you'll see. Many of the Tlingit robes and cloaks and blankets you'll see are most likely chilkat. The really neat thing about this is a lot of weaving is done like horizontal, but chilkat is done vertically. So the way they do it is, it allows them a little bit more freedom, so they can put in the circles that you see in a lot of form line art. They're always so intricate, like insanely so. And let's see. Terry Rothkar, Tlingit artist and weaver, has said, "I have done a robe in as fast as 800 hours, but I've also taken almost 2,000 to do a raven's tail style robe." I'll expand a little bit upon that later, but that's just the beginning of it. I mean, these cloaks are the colors they use, the designs they use, the fringes they put on them. There's so much that goes into them, and again, as I'll expand on soon, they really carry cultural and like spiritual significance. So it's really, there's a lot more than just the work that goes into making them. Now, another interesting thing about the process of making Tlingit art is the coloring, because obviously, they didn't have commercial paints back in the day. So what they used were a lot of natural minerals that were used as dyes. And so the U.S. Forest Service, they say that alum, iron, copper, and tin are all natural minerals that can be used as dyes. And, they all serve their specific purpose. Tin is used for brighter, warmer colors, such as red or yellow. They also use some plants to make these colors. Coal was for the black that you see. But, all these colors and dyes they had were derived from earth. So that's why you see there's repeating, red, blue, green, teal colors on Tlingit art. So going back to the totem poles, this is probably one of the most classical icons and symbols of Northwest Native Americans. But for the Tlingit, they're 20, 40-foot poles. You see mythological, culturally important signals. You see the eagle and the raven, which, is important. One, because the Moedes, but also because mythology. Again, I'll go back to that later, but the raven is extremely important for Tlingit mythology. So totem poles were always raised to commemorate a certain event or teach a lesson. An example of that is the story of the Oyster Man. So essentially what that is an uncle was taking some kids out to teach them how to harvest some food. So he was teaching them how to, harvest oysters, but he was like, never grab them with your hands. But of course, there was one kid who didn't listen. So, he reached down into this hole to try to get an oyster, but it was this huge oyster. It grabbed on his hand and the kid couldn't get his hand out. The tide was out now, so they could find the oysters, but it was rapidly coming in. So, this whole village rushes out, tries to get him, but they can't. So the kid is swallowed by the tide, and unfortunately he dies. So I've got a picture of this Oyster Man totem pole. And this specific one, you can see it's zoomed in on this face. So this represents kind of the spirit of the kid who passed away. And I actually have an older picture here where you can see this crouched human figure with a hand reaching into a mouth at the bottom of the totem pole. So that is directly referencing the story. And then the symbols, as you see, like the beaver and the other animals, just reference the spirits, and specifically the spirit of the kid who passed away. So obviously, as we were just talking about, totem poles carry a lot of significance, not just because they're beautiful and, these huge works of art, but because, there's always some sort of event tied to it. But the Tlingit view art much differently than, Americans or Europeans. As we see, art, it's beautiful, but it's just something on a canvas or it's a sculpture, and we look at it and we recognize, it's art, but it's a thing. So Tlingit believe of the Naknach, which are spirits, masks, songs, and dances, all beings except humans that have the potential to be Naknach. So, they see it more as spirits that are embodying these things, which is pretty beautiful. And again, going back to spirituality and mythology, the raven is one of the most prevalent symbols in Tlingit art, as we see on the totem pole and as we will see on a lot of art. It's because the raven is a trickster god and a shapeshifter, which is in a lot of Native American mythology, but he's also the creator of the world, which is pretty huge. So that's why you see it everywhere. That's why one of the moieties is the raven moiety. So you'll always see, ravens in Tlingit art from past, present, and in the future. And the origins of Chilkat weaving are also really ingrained in mythology, because it's said that during Raven's knowledge-gathering travels of the world, he encountered the sea spirit Gunakadit, and he wore a robe and gifted it to Raven after they had a little dinner. So Raven then brought this robe back to the people, who were the Tlingit, and then they took it apart and finally learned how to make it. So, not only is the raven a symbol, but Chilkat is also, deeply ingrained with raven and mythology. And finally, faces are really common in Tlingit art, and obviously in all art it is, but, you'll see this on robes, just in the center of robes. You almost always see them on totem poles. And these just represent spirits, not only just human spirits, though. They represent, animal spirits, deceased people spirits. And so a lot of the times, animals or faces can be used to tell a story or to signify the clan or moiety of the owner of that, item, whether it be a totem pole or a robe or a box or something. So the next thing I want to talk about is, again, very important. And this kind of exemplifies why Tlingit art is important to them, and on a much different level than it is to us, like Americans. So they have a thing called the A'u, which translates to an owned or purchased thing or object. And this is something, that catalogs, records, events, kind of like a totem pole, like it reminds people, this happened, and there's things to be learned from it. So these can be art, clothing, or it could be a land or a place or something. And Judith Daxus Ramos recalls a time after an 1898 earthquake where somebody spotted an albino raven. So again, ravens, extremely important. So it was a huge, spiritual moment for the people. And then a blanket was made. And it then, once a a'u is made, it's not an a'u yet, there has to be a ceremony called a ku'ik, which is similar to a potlatch, but it's, mainly for this a'u, where it's named and given spirit. So an object has to go through one of these ceremonies to be an a'u. So again, that's why colonization really impacted the Tlingit, because they couldn't have these ceremonies to make any a'u. So, again, the totem poles and the a'u, just that's how much it really killed the art here. But they're not just for art, of course. During these kui ceremonies, the host families, have pictures of ancestors, like right next to the a'u. If they have multiple, they'll lay them out. The elders of the clan will wear a'u if it's a robe or a hat or clothing. And then during the kui ceremony, the a'u is used to wipe away the mourner's tears. And then if you have a bunch of a'u, it shows the history of this family or clan or whatever. In this ceremony, it's just celebration of the past, mourning, but, it's moving on and seeing, there's brightness in the future, and, we'll carry these things with us, but celebrate them. So now to really dig deep on clothing. Historically, Tlingit, like everyday wear, was made out of deer skin, tree bark, leathers, just things they would find and harvest. The style thickness, of course, would depend on the temperature. Men would wear deerskin loincloths when it was hot, and, the robes they would weave during cold months. Footwear, they would wear moccasins and snowshoes. Again, only snowshoes if there was snow. They wore jewelry, which bore symbols of some significance, like a clan marking, moiety, whatever it be. Spruce root, again, was used in basket weaving, but it was also used to make hats. They were tall, so the top went up, but they were also wide brimmed. They went down slightly. They were painted with, again, form line images. Tlingit ceremonial robes and cloaks were the chilkat style. They were brightly colored, worn by dancers, and they had a fringe, so it really emphasizes the movements of the dancers. And very interesting, I believe, was the armor that Tlingit used. So again, obviously clothing, hide, leathers, wood. But the really, really interesting thing for me is they used Chinese coins in their armor. Since Chinese coins have a circle with a square in the middle, they could weave the coins into the armor. And that's just really cool, because it just, shows the worldliness, and, there's a lot of cases of it too. It's not just a single isolated thing. There is more than one. So that's probably one of the most interesting things to me. So finally, I want to talk about Tlingit artists today and what the art means. So we do see a lot of Tlingit artists still that are carrying on this culture. One of them is James Johnson. So he collaborates with a lot of different brands, shoe brands, boots, snowboards. And he's really aiming to just keep this Tlingit culture of art alive, Again, during colonization in the late 19th century, it was almost totally wiped out. I mean, again, totem poles, all this thing, there weren't any opportunities. It was totally banned to recreate this art or do anything. And this is when that raven's tail style weaving, which I touched on earlier, was almost just totally cut out. I mean, it was only rediscovered a few decades ago, maybe. So that's also being brought back. But that's just his aim. He says, main successes as an artist have been the preservation and perpetuation of his culture by restoring and replicating his tribal totems. That's his main goal. But yeah, it's really important, of course, that we keep art alive. But in this case specifically, because, Tlingit art isn't just art, it's the spirit of the ancestors and of the past, their lessons and what they know. So if it dies out, that's hugely detrimental to just Tlingit people as a whole. So I just think the most important thing to be taken from this is to protect culture, protect art, because, it's not always just, a pretty painting on a canvas or a sculpture. It can be a lot more to a lot of people. So I think we just, learn from the past. Don't, ban people from making art or their culture.